no one will hurt you again. Not when I'm alive.
She didn't plan to fall apart in public, but heartbreak has no manners. She walked into the bar with swollen eyes, a shaking chest, and a heart that still carried the fingerprints of a cheating, toxic man. All she wanted was a quiet corner, a drink that didn't judge her, and a moment to breathe without pain. But the bar wasn't quiet tonight, and the man watching her from behind the counter wasn't ordinary. His presence was heavy, his gaze was sharp, his voice, when he finally spoke, wrapped around her like protection she didn't ask for. "Who hurt you?" he asked, too calm, too deep, too dangerous. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his world. She didn't know she had just stepped into the arms of the Mafia boss who had been waiting for someone exactly like her. And from the moment he saw her, he made one silent promise. No one will ever touch what's mine again. Black Rose. If you're ready for a tale of heartbreak, fierce protection, and a love that burns brighter than any fear, then you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe to stay with us for every twist and turn of this intense journey. Now, let's begin. The first shard of her reality cracked at 2:17 a.m. Elara lay in the expansive, cold bed, the silence of the penthouse a heavy blanket. It was a silence she'd grown accustomed to, a silence she'd learned to fill with the sound of her own hopeful thoughts. He's just working late. He's under a lot of pressure. The deal is important. The mantras were fragile, painted in gold leaf over the rotting wood of her relationship. It was the buzz that broke the stillness. Not her phone. His. Liam was asleep beside her, his back turned, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm of innocence. The phone, discarded on his nightstand, glowed once, twice, a persistent, angry bee trapped in glass. A sliver of unease, cold and sharp, pierced Elara's drowsiness. He never got messages this late. Work emergencies went to his work phone, which was charging in his study. Curiosity, that ancient serpent, uncoiled in her gut. She told herself it was nothing. A wrong number. A spam message. But the feeling, a leaden dread, was already settling in her stomach. She moved like a ghost, sliding out from under the duvet, the polished wooden floor cool beneath her bare feet. The moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows painted everything in shades of silver and blue, turning her luxurious prison into an eerie landscape. Her hand hovered over the phone. This was a line she'd never crossed. Trust was the foundation, wasn't it? The cornerstone of the beautiful life they were building? But the foundation had been feeling shaky for months. The canceled dates, the distant look in his eyes, the new password on his laptop he'd casually mentioned, was a company-wide security update. Her finger, acting on a will of its own, tapped the screen. It lit up, and the world she knew ended. The message wasn't from an unknown number. It was saved as Bella, HR. Bella, can't sleep. Still feeling you all over me. Tonight was... Wow, I've never felt so alive. Is the Ice Queen really asleep right next to you? The thought is kind of thrilling. The words didn't register at first. They were just black marks on a bright screen. Then, they rearranged themselves into meaning, each one a hammer blow to her soul. Ice Queen. He'd called her that once during a fight. A cruel, dismissive label she'd wept over for days. He'd apologized, of course. Said he didn't mean it. But he'd given the name to her. To Bella. A numbness spread from her core, freezing her in place. Her breath hitched, a small, broken sound in the vast quiet. Slowly, mechanically, her thumb scrolled up. She wasn't a detective. She was an archaeologist unearthing the ruins of her own life. There were pictures. Liam, his face relaxed and smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years, his arms slung around a beautiful, vibrant blonde woman with laughing eyes. Another of them toasting with cocktails on a rooftop bar she recognized. The night he'd told her he was stuck in a last-minute meeting with out-of-town clients. Then, the videos. Short, intimate clips. Bella blowing a kiss to the camera. Liam, shirtless in a hotel room bed that wasn't theirs, winking. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, the night he'd claimed he was at a team-building retreat and his phone had died. The evidence was a tsunami, and she was drowning in it. The late nights, the new cologne, the sudden interest in the gym, the way he'd flinch when she touched him, as if her love was an imposition. It all clicked into place with a sickening, final clarity. The numbness shattered, replaced by a fire so intense it felt like her blood had been replaced with acid. A sob clawed its way up her throat, but she choked it back, pressing a fist to her mouth. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her break. She looked at the man in the bed, the man she'd planned a future with, the man she'd loved with a ferocity that now felt foolish and pathetic. He was a stranger, a liar, a cheat. The pain was a physical thing, a vice around her lungs, a knife twisting in her heart. But beneath the agony, something else stirred. A cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear fury. She would not cry. Not here. Not for him. With a steadiness that surprised her, she placed the phone back exactly as she found it. She moved to her walk-in closet, her movements efficient and silent. She bypassed the designer dresses and expensive handbags he'd bought her baubles to keep the pretty bird quiet in its gilded cage. She pulled out a large, sturdy duffel bag from the back and began to pack only what was hers. Simple jeans, worn-in t-shirts, the sweater her grandmother had knitted for her, her passport, the small emergency cash fund she'd kept secret, and the first edition copy of Jane Eyre her mother had given her, a totem of a time when love was a promise, not a weapon. She packed her shattered dreams and her broken heart alongside her clothes. She changed out of her silk pajamas into a pair of dark jeans and a simple black top. She didn't look in the mirror. She couldn't bear to see the hollow-eyed woman staring back. As she zipped the bag, a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze. "Elara?" Liam's voice was thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" "It's the middle of the night." She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway of the closet, his hair mussed, his face a mask of confused irritation. For a fleeting second, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with, and the pain flared, white-hot. Then she saw the faint smear of lipstick on his collar that wasn't her shade, and the fire of her rage doused the grief. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice eerily calm, a flat lake over a raging depth. "Leaving? What are you talking about? Is this about me working late again? Don't be so dramatic, Elle." He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. The word dramatic was another one of his tools, used to diminish her feelings. She picked up her duffel bag, the weight of it a comfort. "I know, Liam." "Know what?" He scoffed, but a flicker of unease crossed his face. "I know about Bella, from HR." She let the words hang in the air, watching as the color drained from his face. The mask of the loving, overworked boyfriend crumbled, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. "I saw the messages, the pictures, the videos. I know about the team-building retreat and the dead phone. I know everything." His shock morphed into defiance. "You went through my phone? You had no right." "I had every right." The calm broke, her voice cracking like a whip. "I had the right to not live a lie. I had the right to know that the man I was going to marry was fucking his colleague while telling me I was the love of his life." "Elara, wait, just let me explain." He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched, but it wasn't a plea. It was a demand, a command to quiet down and fall in line. "Don't you touch me," she snarled, stepping back, her body recoiling from him. "There is no explanation. There is no excuse. We're done." She brushed past him, walking out of the closet, out of the bedroom, out of the life they had built. He followed her, his tone shifting from defensive to venomous. "Done? Just like that? You're really going to walk away from all of this?" He gestured wildly around the penthouse. "The life, the money. You'll be nothing without me, Elara. You'll be back in your little nothing town, working your little nothing job. You think you can do better? No one will want you. You're damaged goods." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to wound and weaken. They were the words he'd used subtly for years, chipping away at her confidence, making her believe she was lucky to have him. But now, hearing them laid bare, they lost their power. They were just the pathetic rantings of a caught cheat. She didn't answer. She walked to the front door, her hand on the cold, polished brass handle. "If you walk out that door, don't you ever think about coming back," he shouted, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." Elara paused, turned her head just enough to look at him one last time. The handsome, successful man was gone. All she saw was a small, ugly boy throwing a tantrum. "No, Liam," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. Staying would have been. She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, pulling it shut behind her. The solid thud of the lock engaging was the most final sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a tomb closing, the sound of freedom. The elevator ride down was a descent into a new, terrifying reality. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape began to ebb, and the full, crushing weight of her situation crashed down. She was alone, in the middle of the night, in a city of millions, with nowhere to go. Her family was hundreds of miles away. Her friends, were they even her friends, or were they part of the glittering world Liam had built? Who would side with him? Tears finally came, hot and silent, streaming down her face as she emerged onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. The city was alive around her, a beast of light and sound, indifferent to her personal tragedy. Taxis honked, neon signs flickered, and laughter spilled from a late-night bar down the street. The world kept turning, and she was just a speck, adrift, and heartbroken. She walked aimlessly, the duffel bag feeling heavier with every step. The rain began to fall, a fine, cold mist that soaked through her clothes and matched the desolation inside her. She was a ghost, haunting a city that didn't know her name. After what felt like an eternity, her feet, acting on a memory of a happier time, carried her to a part of the city she hadn't visited in years. It was grittier, more real than the polished, soulless neighborhood of Liam's penthouse. And there, tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up storefront, was a flickering neon sign she remembered, the Obsidian Rose. It was a bar, a dive, really. She and an old friend had come here once, years ago, after a concert, drawn in by the strange, intriguing name. She remembered it being dark, quiet, and strangely safe, a place where people kept to themselves. It was a port in her storm. Any port would do. She pushed the heavy, worn wooden door open. A bell jingled softly overhead. The air inside was a mix of old wood, polished brass, and the rich, smoky scent of good whiskey. It was warm, a stark contrast to the cold dampness outside. The lighting was low, cast from vintage-style lamps that created pools of golden light and deep, comforting shadows. Soft, melancholic jazz played from a hidden speaker, a saxophone's lament that spoke directly to her soul. The bar was mostly empty. A few solitary figures hunched over their drinks at the far end, lost in their own worlds. It was perfect. She slid onto a worn, burgundy leather stool at the opposite end, dropping her duffel bag at her feet like an anchor. She kept her head down, letting her damp hair fall like a curtain, hiding her tear-streaked face. She just needed a drink. Something strong enough to burn away the memory of Liam's face, of Bella's messages. She didn't see the man standing behind the bar, not at first. She only became aware of him when a crystal tumbler was placed silently on the polished wood in front of her. It was filled with 2 fingers of a deep amber liquid. Elara looked up, startled, and her world, which had already ended once tonight, shifted on its axis once more. The man was immense. Not just tall, but broad, with a powerful frame that seemed to suck the very light from the room. He wasn't handsome in the classical, polished way Liam was. This was a different kind of beauty. It was raw, carved from granite and shadow. He had strong, almost brutal features, a sharp jawline darkened with stubble, a straight nose, and a mouth set in a hard, unsmiling line. His hair was black as pitch, swept back from his forehead, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of dark honey, of aged whiskey, and they regarded her with an intensity that was both unnerving and mesmerizing. They didn't just look at her. They saw her. They saw the duffel bag, the rain-soaked clothes, the red-rimmed eyes, the shattered pieces of her spirit. They saw it all, and in their depths, there was no pity, only a quiet, profound understanding. He had a quiet, solid presence that seemed to calm the frantic, panicked bird fluttering in her chest. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask what she wanted. He had simply seen a wounded creature and offered it solace. "You look like you need this," he said. His voice was a low baritone, a rumble that vibrated through the wood of the bar and settled deep in her bones. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Elara's throat was too tight to speak. She simply nodded, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the cool glass. The warmth of the liquor seeped into her skin. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice still that soft, low rumble. He began to polish a glass with a white cloth, his movements economical and precise. He didn't stare, giving her the space to answer or not. A fresh wave of tears threatened, but she fought them back. She took a sip of the whiskey. It was smooth and complex, burning a path of warmth down her throat and into her hollow stomach. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "You could say that," she whispered, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. The kind of night that ends everything." His dark honey eyes met hers again, and for a fleeting second, she saw something flash in them. Not sympathy, but a recognition, as if he too was intimately acquainted with nights that ended everything. "Some things need to end," he said, his gaze unwavering, "for better things to begin." He placed the polished glass down. "I'm Kael." The name suited him. Strong, short, unforgettable. "Elara," she breathed, the name feeling fragile on her lips. "Elara," he repeated, and the way he said it, with a slight, almost imperceptible roll of the R, made it sound like a prayer, a precious thing. It was the first time her name had been spoken with something other than dismissal or cruelty in what felt like a lifetime. In that moment, sitting in the warm, shadowy embrace of the Obsidian Rose, with the storm of her old life raging outside, Elara felt a terrifying, inexplicable sense of coming home. The man before her, Kael, was an enigma wrapped in quiet power and danger. He was a fortress, and she was a refugee from a war she never knew she was fighting. She had escaped a cheating, toxic love, and she had ended up in the arms, or at least in the sight of the man who owned this bar, a man whose quiet intensity promised a different kind of storm altogether, a storm from which she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. She took another sip of the whiskey, her eyes never leaving his. The suspense of what came next was a palpable thing in the air between them, thick and sweet as honey. Her story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The whiskey was a slow, warm fire in her veins, a stark contrast to the icy shards of betrayal still lodged in her heart. Elara kept her hands wrapped around the crystal tumbler, grounding herself in its solidity. Kael's presence was a low, steady hum in the quiet bar, a force of nature contained behind polished wood. He didn't press her, didn't ask for the sordid details of her rough night. He simply existed, a silent pillar in the storm of her ruin. I don't really have a plan," she heard herself say, the confession torn from her. She stared into the amber depths of her drink, avoiding his penetrating gaze. "I just ran." "Running is a plan," Kael replied, his voice that same low, resonant rumble. He was methodically drying a glass, his large, capable hands moving with a surety that fascinated her. "It's the first and most important one. It means you recognize the danger." Her eyes flickered up to his. "Danger?" The word felt too dramatic, too final for the messy, painful reality of Liam's infidelity. Kael placed the glass down and leaned his forearms on the bar, bringing himself closer to her level. The movement was not threatening, but intensely focused. He smelled of sandalwood, clean linen, and the faint, sharp scent of fine whiskey. "A man who betrays your trust in such a fundamental way is not just a cheat, Elara," he said, her name a soft caress in the quiet room. "He is a danger to your spirit, to your peace." Leaving was an act of self-preservation. Never doubt that. Tears welled up again, but this time, they were not just of pain, they were a validation. For months, Liam had made her feel crazy, dramatic, for questioning his absences, his coldness, and here was this stranger, this formidable man who looked like he could break the world with his bare hands, telling her she was right to run, that her pain was valid. It was the most profound kindness she had experienced in years. She swallowed hard, nodding as a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "He called me damaged goods," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. A shadow passed over Kael's face. It was subtle, a mere tightening of the skin around his eyes, a slight hardening of his jaw. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. The few other patrons, a grizzled old man and a woman in a business suit, seemed to feel it too, shifting uncomfortably on their stools. "A man who uses words as weapons is a coward," Kael stated, his voice dropping even lower, taking on a dangerous velvety edge. He doesn't deserve the breath it takes to speak your name, let alone the space in your thoughts. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over her duffel bag. You need a place to stay. Somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The practicalities of her situation were a looming cliff edge. Hotels required credit cards, which Liam could track. Her savings were meager. The thought of a noisy, impersonal hostel made her skin crawl. I'll figure something out, she said, her voice lacking all conviction. No, Kael said, the single word leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a demand, but a statement of fact, as solid and unshakable as the man himself. There's an apartment upstairs. It's clean, safe, and empty. It's yours for as long as you need it. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and a flicker of fear. I can't accept that. I'm a stranger. You don't know me. A ghost of a smile, the first she'd seen, touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making the honey in his eyes warm. It was breathtaking. I know enough. I know you have courage, and I know you need help. That's all I need to know. He reached under the bar and produced a single, old-fashioned key, its metal worn smooth with age. He slid it across the polished wood toward her. It stopped right in front of her glass. The door is around the side of the building, black, with a silver handle. No one will bother you there. This was madness. Accepting a room from a man she'd just met, in a bar called the Obsidian Rose, in the dead of night. Every instinct her mother had given her screamed in warning, but her mother's instincts hadn't accounted for a man like Liam. They hadn't accounted for the soul-deep exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead, and they certainly hadn't accounted for Kael for the profound, unshakable certainty he projected. Her choices were the cold, anonymous streets, a hotel that would lead Liam right to her, or this sanctuary. Her fingers, trembling slightly, reached out and closed around the key. It was warm from his touch. Thank you, she breathed, the words inadequate for the tidal wave of relief and gratitude that washed over her. Don't thank me yet, he said, the ghost of a smile returning. The shower pressure is temperamental. A real, genuine smile, small and wobbly, touched her own lips for the first time that night. It felt foreign on her face, like a muscle long unused. She finished her whiskey, the warmth now a comforting blanket. She stood, slinging the heavy duffel bag over her shoulder. Get some rest, Elara, Kael said, his voice soft. You're safe here. She believed him. With a certainty that defied all logic, she believed him. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped back out into the misty night. The air felt different now, less hostile. She found the black door with the silver handle, just as he'd said. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The apartment was nothing like she expected. It wasn't a dusty storage room or a bare-bones efficiency. It was a small, beautifully appointed studio. The floors were dark hardwood, the walls a warm, earthy terracotta. A large, comfortable-looking bed with a dark wood frame dominated one side of the room, piled high with pillows and a soft gray duvet. A small, but well-equipped kitchenette stood opposite, and a door led to what she assumed was the bathroom. The decor was simple, masculine, and elegant. It felt lived in, loved. She dropped her bag by the door and walked to the center of the room, her senses overwhelmed. The silence here was different from the penthouse's cold emptiness. This was a peaceful, protective quiet. She could still faintly hear the melancholic jazz drifting up from the bar below, a soothing, rhythmic heartbeat. She made her way to the bathroom and turned on the shower. Kael was right. It was temperamental, sputtering to life before settling into a hot, powerful spray. She stripped off her damp, clinging clothes, stepping under the water with a gasp. It was scalding, and she welcomed the burn. She wanted to wash away the feel of Liam's sheets, the memory of his touch, the sound of his lying voice. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, letting the water mingle with the tears that finally, fully, broke free. This time, she didn't choke them back. She wept for the future she'd lost, for the love that had been a lie, for the woman she'd been, naive and trusting. When she emerged, wrapped in a large, impossibly soft towel, she felt raw but clean, purged, She pulled an old, soft t-shirt from her duffel bag. It smelled faintly of her own laundry detergent, a scent of home, and put it on. She didn't bother with anything else. She crawled into the bed, sinking into the mattress that seemed to embrace her weary body. The pillows smelled like sandalwood and clean cotton, like Kael. The thought should have unnerved her. Instead, it was inexplicably comforting. She was in the territory of a powerful, unknown man, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt no fear, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. As she drifted into a troubled sleep, her last conscious thought was of dark, honey eyes watching her from the shadows, a silent vow of protection in their depths. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet survival. Elara barely left the apartment. The world outside the single, large window seemed too bright, too loud, too full of happy couples that felt like personal accusations. Her phone, which she had turned off that first night and only checked sporadically on the apartment's Wi-Fi, was a torrent of messages from Liam. The tone shifted rapidly. First, angry demands. "Where the hell are you? We need to talk about this like adults." Then pleading. "Elara, please. I made a mistake. A huge, stupid mistake. I love you. Come home." Then, manipulative. "Your mother called me. She's worried. You're worrying everyone. This isn't like you." And finally, venomous. "Fine. Run away. You were always too weak for a real relationship anyway. You'll be back. You have nowhere else to go." Each message was a fresh cut, but with each one, the bleeding slowed. The distance, the safety of her strange sanctuary, was giving her perspective. She saw his words for what they were, tools to control her. She didn't reply to a single one. Her only human interaction was with Kael, and it was fleeting, silent, and profound. On the first morning, she had woken to a soft knock on her door. Cautiously, she'd opened it to find a small, neat cardboard box on the floor. Inside was a fresh-baked croissant, still warm, a perfect red apple, and a tall thermos of rich, black coffee. There was no note. The same thing happened the next morning, and the next. She never saw him deliver it. It was as if a quiet guardian angel left sustenance at her door. She'd eat the food slowly, savoring every bite, the simple acts of nourishment feeling like a rebirth. On the fourth day, emboldened by the coffee and the growing sense of safety, she ventured downstairs to the bar in the late afternoon. Before it opened, the space was filled with the golden, slanted light of the setting sun, dust motes dancing in the beams. Kael was there, alone, inventorying bottles behind the bar. He looked up as she entered, and that same intense focus settled on her. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been. "Thank you. For the food. For everything." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "You look like you've slept." "A little." She hovered near the bar, unsure of what to do. Her eyes fell on a stack of clean cloths. Without a word, she walked behind the bar, a bold, perhaps foolish move, and picked one up. She started polishing the already gleaming glasses he had set out. Kael stopped his work and watched her, a curious expression on his face. He didn't stop her. "You don't have to do that," he said after a moment. "I know," she said, not looking at him, focusing on the circular motion of the cloth on the cool glass. "But I need to do something. I can't just hide forever." He was silent for a long moment. Hiding is underrated. It gives you time to heal, to remember who you are without his voice in your ear. Her hands stilled. He saw everything. He understood everything. "Who am I?" she whispered, the question directed more to herself than to him. "That," he said, his voice low and intimate in the empty bar, "is the most exciting question you can ask, and you get to decide the answer." He moved then, coming to stand beside her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a physical thing, a gravitational pull. He took the glass from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. A jolt, like a static shock, but warmer, shot up her arm. "Like this," he murmured, his voice a soft vibration next to her ear. He demonstrated, his large hands moving the cloth with a practiced, effortless grace. "Small circles. You're not trying to scrub away a stain. You're honoring the glass, revealing its clarity. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The air was thick, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm of her past and everything to do with the man in the present. This was more than just learning to polish a glass. It was a lesson in care, in patience, in seeing the inherent value in something and helping it shine. She took the glass back, her fingers trembling. She tried to mimic his motion, her circles smaller, more deliberate. "Good," he said, the single word of praise warming her more than the whiskey ever had. And in that golden, quiet afternoon, surrounded by the scent of wood and whiskey, with a man whose touch was a brand and whose words were a balm, Elara began to feel the first, fragile stirrings of something new. It wasn't just safety, it wasn't just gratitude. It was a flicker of curiosity, a desire to know the secrets in Kael's dark honey eyes, a longing to understand the man who ran a shadowy bar, who spoke of honor and danger, and who offered sanctuary to broken birds without asking for anything in return. The romance was a slow, sweet burn, starting with the brush of a finger, a shared silence, and the profound understanding that sometimes the most dangerous place to be was also the safest. A week bled into the fabric of Elara's new, strange existence. The initial paralyzing shock had receded, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache, like a bone-deep bruise. But in its place, something else was growing, a tentative sense of self. In the quiet of the apartment above the Obsidian Rose, she was rediscovering the sound of her own thoughts, uninterrupted by Liam's criticisms or the frantic buzz of the life he'd curated for her. Her days developed a new rhythm, a quiet cadence built around the bar's schedule, and Kael's silent, watchful presence. Mornings were for the small box of breakfast left at her door and the slow, deliberate process of putting herself back together. She'd started a journal, scribbling down her anger, her grief, and her fleeting moments of peace. The words were a purge, a way to empty the poison Liam had dripped into her soul. In the afternoons, before the bar opened, she would venture downstairs. It became their time. Kael was always there, a constant in the shifting light, performing the mundane tasks of running a bar with a kind of reverent focus. And she would join him. It started with polishing glasses, but it quickly grew. She learned how to slice lemons and limes into perfect, thin wheels, how to restock the shelves in a precise, logical order, how to identify different types of whiskey by their color and scent. It was meditative. It was real. Her hands, which had once been occupied with tapping on a tablet to order expensive decor she didn't even like, were now doing honest, simple work. Kael was a patient, quiet teacher. He never gave orders, only suggestions. His voice, that low baritone, was a steady guide. "The Glenlivet goes here, next to the Macallan," he'd say, his hand briefly covering hers as she reached for the wrong spot. The contact was always electric, a brief, searing heat that left her skin tingling long after he'd moved away. They're from the same region. They keep each other company. She'd look at him, at the intense focus on his face as he arranged the bottles, and wonder what it would be like to be kept company by him. One such afternoon, she was wiping down the heavy wooden tables, lost in the rhythmic motion, when she felt his gaze on her. She looked up. He was leaning against the bar, arms crossed, just watching her. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp planes of his cheekbones. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You're healing," he stated, his dark honey eyes soft. It was such a simple observation, but it landed with the force of a revelation. She was. The hollows under her eyes were less pronounced. The constant, nervous tremor in her hands had stilled. When she caught her reflection in the mirror behind the bar, she didn't see a ghost anymore. She saw a woman, weary but present. "It's this place," she said softly, gesturing around the shadowy, quiet room. "It's safe." "The world isn't," he replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "He's still looking for you." A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She'd been trying to ignore the messages, which had now shifted to texts from unknown numbers and voicemails from mutual friends, expressing concern. "How do you know?" she whispered. "This is my territory, Elara," he said, pushing off the bar and walking toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the world he inhabited. I know when someone is sniffing around where they don't belong. A man matching his description has been in the area, showing your picture to shopkeepers. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. Liam was here. He was close. The sanctuary of the Obsidian Rose suddenly felt fragile, its walls as thin as paper. She must have paled, because Kael closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood close, a human shield between her and the threat outside. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. She dragged her terrified eyes up to his. "He will not set foot in this bar. He will not come near you. Do you understand me?" The words were a vow, spoken with an absolute, unshakable certainty. "You are under my protection now, under my protection." The words should have sounded archaic, possessive, but from him, they sounded like the most sacred promise. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, banked by the fierce, protective fire in his eyes. "Why?" she breathed, the question she'd been too afraid to ask finally tumbling out. "Why are you doing this for me? A stranger?" For a long moment, he was silent, his gaze searching her face as if looking for an answer written there. The air between them crackled with unspoken things. "Because I know what it is to be betrayed," he said finally, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "I know the taste of that particular poison, and I saw myself in your eyes that first night, the shattered look of someone who gave their trust to the wrong person." Her heart ached for him. This formidable, powerful man had been broken, too. The realization created a new, profound connection between them. They were both survivors. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't be," he said, a wry, sad smile touching his lips. "It forged me into who I am, just as this will forge you." He reached out then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His hand, large and warm, came up to cradle her cheek. His thumb, surprisingly gentle, stroked away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. The touch was a brand, a claiming, and a comfort all at once. It sent a shockwave of pure, undiluted sensation through her entire body. It was nothing like Liam's calculated, possessive touches. This was reverent. "You are not damaged goods, Elara," he murmured, his eyes holding hers captive. "You are a treasure that a fool mistook for common stone." A sob escaped her, but it was a sob of release, of healing. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second, savoring the solid, real warmth of his hand. This was what safety felt like. This was what being seen felt like. The moment was shattered by the jingle of the front door. Kael's hand dropped from her face instantly, his expression shifting from open vulnerability to neutral, impenetrable calm in a heartbeat. 2 regulars walked in, chatting loudly. The spell was broken, but the echo of it remained, humming in the air between them. Elara felt flushed, her skin still tingling from his touch. She busied herself with her cleaning cloth, her mind reeling. That night, the bar was quieter than usual. The storm of her emotions had left her exhausted, yet strangely exhilarated. When the last patron left and Kael flipped the sign to closed, the silence felt different. It was charged, expectant. She helped him with the final closing duties in a comfortable silence. As she wiped down the last table, she felt him come up behind her. She stilled, her breath catching. "Elara," he said, her name a soft caress in the quiet room. She turned to face him. He was so close. The dim light carved his features into a mask of beautiful, dangerous intensity. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for what you said earlier." He didn't answer with words. He simply looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fleeting, heart-stopping second. The air grew thick, sweet with the scent of whiskey and the promise of something neither of them was yet brave enough to name. He reached out and tucked the same strand of hair behind her ear that she had fussed with earlier. His knuckles brushed against her cheek, a whisper of a touch that set her nerve endings on fire. "You should get some rest, Solnishko," he murmured, the foreign endearment rolling off his tongue like dark honey. "What does that mean?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. A slow, genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners, spread across his face. It was devastating. "It means little son," he said softly. Tears pricked her eyes again, but they were tears of wonder. "Little son." He saw light in her, when all she had felt was darkness. She didn't know who moved first. Perhaps they both did, drawn together by an invisible, irresistible force. One moment they were standing apart, the next, she was in his arms. It wasn't a passionate, frantic kiss. It was slow, deep, and searching. A question and an answer. His lips were soft yet firm against hers, moving with a patient, devastating expertise that stole the breath from her lungs and the thoughts from her head. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his solid, unyielding body, and she melted into him. Her hands came up to clutch at his shoulders, holding on as the world tilted on its axis. This was nothing like the kisses she'd shared with Liam. Those had been about possession, about marking territory. This kiss was about discovery. It was about connection. It tasted of whiskey and truth and a future she had been too afraid to hope for. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Elara rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the frantic, steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that matched her own. He held her for a long time, his chin resting on the top of her head, his hands stroking slow, soothing circles on her back. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured into her hair, but his arms tightened around her, contradicting his words. "Why?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Because my world is complicated," he said, his voice heavy. "It's not a safe place for a little son." She leaned back, looking up at him, her gaze steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "I'm not as fragile as I look, Kael." He looked down at her, his expression a turbulent mix of desire, protectiveness, and fear. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I know," he breathed. "That's what terrifies me." He kissed her again, this kiss softer, sweeter, a seal on a promise that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. In the shadowy silence of the bar, surrounded by the ghosts of their past pains, Elara and Kael began to weave a new story. It was a story that started with escape, was built on a foundation of silent understanding, and was now blooming into a romance that felt as dangerous and inevitable as the man himself. But outside, the past was not done with them, and it was closer than they thought. The world had receded, leaving only the feel of Kael's lips on hers, the solid strength of his arms around her, and the frantic, joyful hammering of her own heart. The kiss in the shadowy bar had been a line crossed, a silent agreement that whatever was growing between them was no longer just about protection or gratitude. It was real, and it was terrifying, and it was the most right thing Elara had ever felt. When they finally pulled apart, the air itself seemed to shimmer. Kael didn't let her go far. He kept one arm around her waist, his other hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw, his dark honey eyes searching hers. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice a rough, low whisper. The question wasn't just about the kiss, it was about him, his world, the complications he'd warned her about. Elara, her body still humming from his touch, found a courage she didn't know she possessed. The old her, the one who lived in the penthouse and jumped at Liam's disapproval, would have hesitated. The new her, the one forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered in the quiet sanctuary of the Obsidian Rose, met his gaze without flinching. "I've never been more sure of anything," she whispered back. A profound relief washed over his features, softening the hard lines of his face. He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then we take this slow, Solnishko," he murmured against her skin. "My world, it doesn't get to touch this. Not yet." He walked her upstairs to her apartment, his hand a warm, possessive weight on the small of her back. At her door, he didn't try to come in. He simply took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Sleep well," he said, lifting their joined hands to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and achingly sweet. "You too," she managed, her voice breathy. He waited until she was inside. The lock clicked into place, before she heard his footsteps retreating down the stairs. Elara leaned against the door, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face. She brought her hand up, staring at the spot his lips had touched. The ghost of his kiss was a brand, a promise. That night, she dreamed not of Liam's betrayal, but of Kael's eyes, and the way he'd called her his little son. The days that followed were a study in sweet, agonizing tension. Their dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The air between them was now thick with unspoken desire and a new, profound intimacy. Their afternoon rituals in the empty bar became charged with a new energy. When she polished glasses, he would come up behind her, his chest brushing against her back, his hands covering hers to adjust her grip. "Like this," he'd murmur, his breath warm against her ear, and she'd shiver, not from the cold, but from the sheer proximity of him. He started teaching her how to make cocktails. He stood beside her, his body a solid line of heat, guiding her hands as she measured and poured. "The old-fashioned isn't just a drink," he explained, his voice a low rumble next to her. "It's a principle. Respect for the spirit. No hiding the whiskey behind sugar and fruit. It's honest." She watched his large, capable hands muddle the sugar cube and bitters with a precise, powerful twist. It was a metaphor for him, she thought. Honest, powerful, unapologetic. When she successfully made her first one, he took the glass from her, his fingers brushing against hers. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. A slow, approving smile spread across his face. "Perfect," he declared, and she felt perfect. Seen, valued for a skill she'd learned, not for the image she projected. The romance was in these small, constant moments. It was in the way he always made sure her favorite tea was stocked in the apartment. It was in the new, thicker towels that appeared in her bathroom one day. It was in the way, one evening as they sat on the worn leather sofa in the back of the bar after closing, he told her a little of his past. Not the dangerous parts, she could feel him holding those back, but the human parts. He told her about growing up in a rough neighborhood, about the mother who worked 3 jobs to keep him fed, about the longing for a stability that always seemed just out of reach. "I built this place," he said, gesturing around the bar, brick by brick. "It was the first thing that was truly mine. A place where I made the rules, where people were treated with respect. It feels like a sanctuary," Elara said softly, curled up next to him, her head resting on his shoulder. His arm was around her, his hand absently stroking her arm. "It is," he agreed, his voice soft. "It was mine, and now it's yours." She tilted her head up to look at him. The low light softened his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. She reached up and traced the line of his brow, her touch tentative. He closed his eyes, leaning into her caress as if he were starved for it. "You're so beautiful," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. His eyes opened, and the raw, unguarded emotion in them stole her breath. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss into her palm. "You see me?" "Elara," he said, his voice thick with something that sounded like awe. "Really see me? And you're not afraid?" "I was," she admitted. "At first, but not of you. I was afraid of the way you made me feel. So alive, so quickly. And now?" he prompted, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist. "Now I'm afraid of losing this," she confessed. "I'm afraid of him, finding me, ruining this." A shadow crossed his face, the protector surfacing. "He won't! I have men watching. He won't get within a block of this place. I have men watching." The statement was a stark reminder that Kael was not just a bartender. It was a glimpse into the world he kept hidden from her, the world of complications and danger. But instead of frightening her, it made her feel safer. He was not a man who made idle promises. He leaned down and kissed her then, a slow, deep, consuming kiss that tasted of whiskey and a desperate, shared hope. It was a kiss that spoke of long, lonely nights and the startling, beautiful discovery of a kindred spirit. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, losing herself in the taste and feel of him. For 2 weeks, they existed in this beautiful, fragile bubble. Elara's smile became a real, frequent thing. The hollows in her cheeks filled out. She started sketching again, a hobby she'd abandoned under Liam's subtle mockery. She drew the bar, the bottles, the play of light through the windows, and she drew Kael, the strong line of his profile, the intensity in his eyes. She was falling in love with him. It was a quiet, certain knowledge that settled deep in her bones. It was different from what she'd felt for Liam. That had been a frantic, performative love, always seeking validation. This was a steady, deep-rooted thing, built on shared silence, mutual respect, and a healing that was happening for both of them. One night, as a thunderstorm raged outside, rattling the windows of the bar, they lay tangled together on the sofa, listening to the rain. They had spent the evening talking and kissing, a slow, lazy exploration that was more intimate than anything she had ever known. His shirt was unbuttoned. Her fingers were splayed over the warm, solid muscle of his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured against her hair, his voice husky. "Not like that," he added quickly, sensing her slight tension. "Just stay. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms. I want to know you're safe." The request was so raw, so vulnerable, coming from this powerful man. It wasn't a demand, but a plea. She looked up at him, at the storm in his eyes mirroring the one outside, and nodded. Okay. He led her upstairs, not to her apartment, but to his. It was on the floor above hers, a larger, sparser space that was unmistakably his. Dark woods, deep colors, a wall of books, and a large window that looked out over the rain-slicked city. It was the den of a king. He gave her one of his soft t-shirts to wear. It swam on her, smelling overwhelmingly of him. They climbed into his large bed, and he pulled her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. His body was a furnace at her back, a solid wall of heat and safety. As the thunder crashed outside, she felt safer than she ever had in her life. Lying in the arms of the most dangerous man she had ever met, she felt utterly, completely protected. "Kael?" she whispered into the darkness. Thank you for all of this." His arms tightened around her. "You saved me too, Solnishko," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and emotion. "You brought the sun back into my life." She fell asleep with a smile on her face, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and the storm, believing, for the first time, that she had truly escaped her old life. But the storm outside was a portent. The next morning, the sun was shining, the city washed clean. Elara woke up in Kael's arms, a feeling of profound peace settling over her. He was already awake, watching her, a soft, wondering expression on his face. "Good morning," he rasped, leaning in to kiss her, a slow, tender greeting. It was perfect. Later that day, she decided to be brave. She needed to face the world, just for a moment. She wanted to buy a proper thank you gift for Kael, something that wasn't paid for with the emergency cash he'd indirectly given her. She told him she was just going for a short walk around the block to get some air. He hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his desire to not cage her. "Take this," he said, pressing a small, sleek black phone into her hand. "It's secure. My number is the only one programmed in it. If you feel even a flicker of unease, you call me. Don't think, just call." She took the phone, her heart swelling at his concern. "I will, I promise." She walked out into the afternoon sunlight, feeling strangely exposed after weeks in the bar's comforting shadows. She kept her head down, her senses on high alert. She found a small, quirky boutique a few blocks away and bought him a beautiful, old-fashioned fountain pen. He'd mentioned once that he missed the feel of writing with a proper pen. Feeling triumphant, she turned to walk back, a small smile on her face. She was just half a block from the comforting sight of the Obsidian Rose's flickering sign when a hand shot out from an alleyway, clamping around her arm like a vice. Her heart stopped. The bag with the pen clattered to the pavement. She was wrenched into the shadows, the grip bruisingly tight. And then she saw him. Liam. His face was a mask of fury and triumph. He looked haggard, unshaven, his eyes burning with a manic light. "There you are," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew I'd find you. Did you really think you could hide from me? In this dump?" Fear, cold and paralyzing, flooded her system. Her sanctuary had been breached, the bubble had burst, and in her pocket, the black phone felt like a lifeline, and 1,000,000 miles away. The world narrowed to the bruising pressure of Liam's grip on her arm and the wild, triumphant gleam in his eyes. The scent of his familiar cologne, once a comfort, now made her stomach lurch with revulsion. The small bag containing Kael's fountain pen lay at their feet, a symbol of her new life trampled in the grime of the alley. "Let go of me, Liam," Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady, though a violent tremor ran through her core. "Let go?" he sneered, his face contorted into an ugly mask. "After all the trouble you've put me through? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have you just vanish?" People were talking. My colleagues were asking questions. He shook her, just once, a sharp, brutal motion. "You made a fool out of me." The absurdity of his statement, the sheer, unadulterated narcissism, cut through her fear like a knife. He wasn't hurt that she'd left. He was enraged that her departure had inconvenienced and embarrassed him. "I made a fool out of you?" she shot back, her courage flaring. "You did that all by yourself with Bella from HR. Or did you forget the pictures? The videos?" His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed into slits. He hadn't expected her to fight back. The old Elara would have been crying, pleading. This new Elara, the one forged in Kael's sanctuary, stood her ground. "That was nothing," he spat. "A moment of weakness. You drove me to it with your constant neediness. But this—" he gestured around the dirty alley with disgust. "Hiding in this filth? This is a new low. Even for you. You look pathetic." His words were meant to wound, to shrink her back into the woman he could control, but they glanced off the armor Kael had helped her forge. She thought of Kael's voice calling her Solnishko. She thought of his hands, so gentle on her skin. She was not pathetic. She was a survivor. "I'd rather be here than one more second in that sterile prison you call a home with a man I don't even recognize," she said, her voice low and fierce. Fury erupted in his eyes. He shoved her back against the rough brick wall of the alley, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. "You're coming home. Now, we're going to fix this, and you're going to act like a respectable fiancé should." As his free hand grabbed for her other arm, her panic finally broke through the courage. She twisted, trying to break free, but he was too strong. Her mind screamed one name, Kael. Her right hand, trapped but partially free, scrambled in her jacket pocket. Her fingers closed around the cool, sleek shape of the phone. She couldn't look. She couldn't press a button. She could only pray. With every ounce of strength she had, she jammed her thumb against the screen, hoping, praying she was hitting the call button. "Stop fighting me!" Liam snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them, blocking the sun at the mouth of the alley. It wasn't just a shadow. It was an absence of sound, a drop in temperature. Liam froze, his head whipping around. Kael stood there. He wasn't running. He wasn't shouting. He simply stood, his immense frame filling the alleyway, his presence so vast and menacing it seemed to suck the very sound from the air. His face was a granite mask of cold, controlled fury. His dark honey eyes, usually so warm for her, were now chips of frozen amber, fixed on Liam's hand where it gripped Elara's arm. Elara had never seen such a terrifying sight. This was not her Kael, her patient teacher, her tender lover. This was the man from the shadows, the king of his territory, the Mafia boss. "Take your hand off her," Kael said. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but it carried the force of a thunderclap, vibrating with a lethal promise. Liam, emboldened by his own arrogance and rage, recovered from his initial shock. He pulled Elara tighter, using her as a shield. "Who the hell are you? This is a private matter between me and my fiancé." Kael took one step forward, then another. His movements were fluid, predatory. Each step was measured, deliberate, the calm before an annihilation. "She is not your fiancé," Kael stated, his voice still that deadly quiet. "She is under my protection. You have 3 seconds to remove your hand before I remove it for you." Liam laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Your protection? What are you, her new bartender boyfriend?" "Get lost before I call the police." "1," Kael said, his eyes never leaving Liam's. "You're insane! Elara, tell this psycho to back off," Liam demanded, shaking her. Tears of relief and fear streamed down Elara's face. "Let me go, Liam. Please." 2. Panic finally began to dawn in Liam's eyes. He saw the absolute, unshakable certainty in Kael's gaze. This was not a bluff. He shoved Elara away from him so violently that she stumbled, falling to her knees on the damp pavement. Kael's focus didn't break. He looked at Elara for the first time. "Are you hurt, Solnishko?" She shook her head, clutching her throbbing arm, unable to speak. Kael's attention returned to Liam. The brief moment of humanity was gone, replaced by something ancient and ruthless. "You laid hands on what is mine," Kael said, taking the final step that closed the distance between them. "You spoke to her with disrespect. You caused her fear." Liam, now truly terrified, took a step back. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. She's all yours. She's nothing but a hysterical—" He never finished the sentence. Kael's move was too fast to follow. There was no dramatic wind-up, no shouted threat. One moment he was standing still, the next, his fist connected with Liam's jaw with a sickening, wet crack. It wasn't a punch. It was a piston strike. Liam crumpled, collapsing to the ground like a sack of stones, moaning in pain, clutching his face. Blood streamed between his fingers. Kael stood over him, his breathing even, his fury contained in a terrifying, icy calm. He bent down, grabbing a handful of Liam's expensive shirt, and hauled him up until their faces were inches apart. "Listen to me very carefully." Kael's voice was a low, venomous whisper that promised unimaginable pain. "Elara no longer exists for you. You will forget her face. You will forget her name. If you ever come near this part of the city again, if you ever so much as think about her, if you send her one more text, I will not be so surgical." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a tone meant only for Liam. "I own the shadows in this city. I own the police you threaten to call. I own the very air you are struggling to breathe right now. If you test me, you will disappear, and no one will ever find so much as a tooth to remember you by. Do you understand?" Liam, his eyes wide with primal terror, could only manage a gurgling, blood-soaked nod. Kael released him, letting him drop back to the filthy ground with a thud. He then turned his back on him, as if he were nothing more than garbage. He walked over to Elara, who was still kneeling, shaking. The transformation was instantaneous. The terrifying Avenger was gone, replaced by the man she loved. His face was etched with concern as he knelt before her. "Elara," he breathed, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. His touch was infinitely gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of moments before. "I'm here. You're safe. I've got you." He helped her to her feet, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist, supporting her trembling body. He picked up the fallen bag with the pen, tucking it into his pocket without a word. He didn't even glance back at Liam's whimpering form. He led her out of the alley and back into the sunlight, shielding her with his body. As they reached the door of the Obsidian Rose, two large, quiet men in dark suits appeared as if from nowhere. Kael gave them a slight nod. They understood, moving past them toward the alley. Kael didn't take her to her apartment. He took her directly to his. He sat her on the edge of his bed and knelt in front of her, his hands running over her arms, checking for injuries. "Did he hurt you? Tell me the truth," he urged, his eyes searching hers. "Just my arm," she whispered, showing him the red, finger-shaped bruises already darkening on her skin. A fresh wave of fury flashed in his eyes, but he banked it, for her. He stood and went to the bathroom, returning with a warm, wet cloth. Gently, he cleaned the grime from her hands and knees from her fall. Then he retrieved an ice pack from his small kitchen, wrapping it in a towel and carefully pressing it to her bruised arm. The care in his actions, the profound tenderness after witnessing his terrifying power, broke the last of her composure. A sob racked her body. He gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest as she cried tears of fear, of relief, of the final, searing release of her old life. "Shh, my brave Solnishko," he murmured into her hair, rocking her gently. "It's over. He will never touch you again. I swear it on my life." When her tears finally subsided, she looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I was so scared, but I knew you would come." I pressed the button. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the tip of her nose. "I will always come for you, no matter where you are, no matter what." He held her for a long time, until her shaking stopped and her breathing evened out. The sun began to set, casting long, golden beams across his bedroom floor. "What you did," she began, her voice hesitant. "What I did was necessary," he finished for her, his voice firm but gentle. "My world is not kind, Elara. It does not understand negotiation or reason when it comes to a threat against what is precious. It only understands one language. I had to speak it to him so he would never, ever forget. He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. Does that man frighten you? She looked into the eyes of the man who had just broken another man's jaw without a flicker of emotion, the man who commanded shadows and whispered threats that made blood run cold. She saw the violence he was capable of, but she also saw the unwavering devotion, the fierce protectiveness, the profound love that was the source of it all. No, she said, and she meant it. He doesn't frighten me. He loves me, and I love him. The confession hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. Kael's breath caught. The last of the storm in his eyes cleared, replaced by a wonder so pure it stole her breath. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. Say it again, he whispered, his voice raw. I love you, Kael. A shudder ran through his powerful frame. When he opened his eyes, they were shining with unshed tears. I have waited my whole life to hear those words from someone who saw all of me, he rasped. I love you, Elara. More than my next breath, more than this city. You are my heart. He kissed her then, a kiss of claiming, of devotion, of a love that was forged in fire and sealed in blood. It was a kiss that held the ghost of his violence and the promise of his eternal protection. It was the kiss of a king and his queen, and in that moment, Elara knew she wasn't just safe in his arms. She was home. The confession of love did not magically erase the echo of Liam's whimpers or the memory of Kael's chilling, efficient violence. That night, Elara slept fitfully in Kael's arms, her dreams a fractured montage of sneering faces and the sound of breaking bone. Each time she jolted awake, gasping, his arms would tighten around her, and his low, steady voice would murmur in the dark, I'm here. You're safe. Sleep, Solnishko. He was her anchor in the turbulent sea of the aftermath. The next morning, the reality of Kael's world began to settle around her, not as a threat, but as a fact. The two quiet men from the alley, Ivan and Leo, she learned were now a permanent, subtle presence near the Obsidian Rose. They weren't menacing, they were polite, almost reverent when they nodded to her. They were Kael's sentinels, and by extension, hers. Liam was true to his terror. His phone number was disconnected. All social media accounts were deleted. It was as if he had been digitally erased from the planet. A part of Elara, the part that had once loved him, felt a pang of something like sorrow for the broken man he was. But the larger part, the survivor, felt only a profound, quiet finality. That chapter was closed, its pages ripped out and burned. Her life now was here, in the warm, shadowy heart of Kael's kingdom. Weeks turned into a month, and the rhythm of their life deepened, woven with threads of ordinary domesticity and the extraordinary undercurrent of his power. Elara was no longer a guest or a temporary resident. She was a part of the bar's soul. She officially took over the bookkeeping, her organized mind untangling the complex dual ledgers with an ease that made Kael look at her with a new kind of admiration. You see the patterns, he'd said, watching her work at the small desk in the back office. Most people just see numbers. In the afternoons, she still helped him prep the bar, but now it was different. Now, as she sliced lemons, he would come up behind her, wrap his arms around her waist, and bury his face in her neck, breathing her in as if she were the only source of oxygen in the world. Now, their lessons on cocktails ended with him tasting the drink from her lips, the flavors of whiskey and citrus mingling in a kiss that was both sweet and intoxicating. The romance was a constant, living thing. It was in the way he always made sure her favorite chocolate was in the cupboard. It was in the new, larger sketchbook and set of expensive charcoals that appeared on her bedside table one day. It was in the way he'd watch her from across the room, a soft, possessive wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't believe she was real. One evening, he led her upstairs to his apartment, but instead of stopping there, he took her up a narrow, hidden staircase she'd never noticed, to a door that opened onto the roof. Elara gasped. The entire rooftop had been transformed into a secret garden. Strings of delicate fairy lights were woven through trellises heavy with jasmine and climbing roses. Potted olive and lemon trees stood in corners, and in the center was a wrought iron table set for two, overlooking the glittering, endless sprawl of the city. "Kael," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. It's magical." "It was a storage space," he said, coming to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "I had it made for you. A place for my little son to actually feel the sun. A place that's just for us. No bar, no business, just you and me." Tears of joy welled in her eyes. This wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. A declaration that he wanted to build a beautiful, peaceful world with her, high above the shadows he commanded. They ate a simple, delicious meal under the stars, the sounds of the city a distant hum below. He told her more about his mother, about the fierce, proud woman who had worked herself to the bone for him, and who had died just before he'd bought the bar. "She would have loved you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have said you have a strong spirit." Later, they danced. There was no music, just the rhythm of their heartbeats and the whisper of the night breeze. His arms were strong around her, his body a solid fortress as they swayed together under the fairy lights. He sang softly in her ear, a old, melancholic Russian lullaby, his voice a rough, tender caress. "What are the words?" she asked, her head resting on his chest. He translated softly. "The wind sleeps in the forest. The moon is a cradle of gold. Sleep, my soul. Sleep, my heart. For the one I love, I will always hold." It was the most romantic moment of her life. It was perfect. But his world, as he had warned her, was never far away. A few days later, a well-dressed, sharply anxious man came into the bar during closed hours. He was clearly not a regular. He spoke to Kael in low, urgent tones, his eyes flickering nervously toward Elara. Kael listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply gave a few, quiet instructions, his voice so calm it was more terrifying than any shout could have been. The man nodded vigorously, almost bowing, before scurrying out. When the man was gone, Kael walked over to Elara, who was polishing the same glass for the 5th time, her knuckles white. "Elara," he said, his voice gentle. "Look at me." She did. "That man disrespected a deal. He stole from me. He thought because I had been distracted lately." He gave her a small, meaningful look. "That I was weak. He was mistaken." "What will happen to him?" she asked, her voice small. "He will return what he stole, with significant interest, and he will understand the cost of betrayal," Kael said evenly. He reached out and took the glass from her trembling hand, setting it aside. He then took both of her hands in his. "This is the reality of my life, Solnishko. I do not seek violence, but I rule a world that respects only strength. My strength is what keeps this place." He gestured around the peaceful, empty bar. "And you, safe. The peace we have is built on the certainty of my retribution. Do you understand?" She looked at their joined hands. His were capable of such terrible violence and such exquisite tenderness. She thought of Liam, and how a single display of that violence had freed her forever. She thought of the man who had just left, who would be disciplined, not out of cruelty, but to maintain the order that allowed her to dance on a rooftop under fairy lights. She understood. It wasn't a pretty world, but it was an honest one, and his power, wielded with such precise control, was not a curse, but the very shield that protected their love. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. "And I'm not afraid." A weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He pulled her into a fierce, grateful embrace. "You are my strength," he whispered into her hair. That became their new truth. Elara did not live in his world of shadows. She was the light that made it bearable. He did not hide his dealings from her, and she did not flinch from them. She was his confidant, his calm center. When he came to her after a long, difficult day, his knuckles sometimes raw, the shadows deep in his eyes, she wouldn't ask questions. She would simply take his hand, lead him to the rooftop garden, and sit with him in the quiet until the tension left his body and he could breathe again. 1 year to the day after she had stumbled, heartbroken and rain-soaked, into the Obsidian Rose, Kael closed the bar for a private party. It was just the two of them, Ivan and Leo. He led her to their rooftop. The fairy lights were glowing, and a small quartet was playing the same melancholic jazz that had been playing the night they met. He had recreated it all. After they danced, under the same stars that had witnessed their first real kiss, Kael led her to the edge of the roof, overlooking their kingdom. He turned to her, took both her hands in his, and knelt. Elara's heart stopped. "Elara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, his dark honey eyes gleaming in the starlight. "A year ago, a lost, beautiful soul walked into my life and lit a fire in the darkness I had called home. You didn't just escape a toxic love, you arrived as my destiny. You are my sanctuary, my solnishko, my everything. This life I offer you is not always simple, and it is not always safe, but I will spend every second of it ensuring you never regret choosing me. I will love you, protect you, and honor you until my last breath." He pulled a small, black velvet box from his pocket. Inside was not a traditional diamond, but a stunning, deep yellow sapphire, cut into a sunburst, set in a band of twisted rose and white gold. "Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? Will you rule this kingdom by my side?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Elara's face. She looked at the man she loved, the dangerous Mafia boss, the tender teacher, the fierce protector, the beautiful, broken soul who had become her whole world. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion, then louder, filled with all the love and certainty in her heart. "Yes, Kael, 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It was a symbol of their story, a sun captured in gold, born from darkness, meant to shine forever. He stood and kissed her, a kiss of promise, of forever, of a love that had been tested and had emerged unbreakable. As they held each other, looking out at the city lights, Elara knew she hadn't just escaped a cheating, toxic love. She had run headlong into her fate. She had found a love that was fierce and protective, tender and real. She had ended up in the arms of the Mafia boss, and in doing so, she had found her king, her soulmate, and the magnificent, powerful love of a lifetime. Did Elara and Kael's story capture your heart? If you're craving more tales of fierce protectors, heart-stopping romance, and love that conquers all, then you need to subscribe. Join our community of romance lovers and never miss a new story. Let us know in the comments what you loved most about their journey. Your feedback inspires our next great love story.